These two macros from an earlier lesson have the same name, but they have a different number of parameters. You can actually use both of these macros in the same program, and which one is expanded is determined by the number of arguments you provide. This is called overloading. The same name is defined more than once. You can use the name as often as you want, as long as the number of parameters on each one is different. There is also the concept of greedy parameters. Here is a simple example. Notice that this macro is defined with two parameters followed by a plus sign. That means you can provide as many arguments as you want. The first one will be expanded as the first parameter, but the second parameter will be made up of all the rest of the arguments on the line. This macro could be expanded with this statement. The result would be as if you had written a line like this. All the remaining arguments with commas are included as one. Actually, this same macro could have been written as a non-greedy macro, and the same thing could still be done. Here it is, the same macro, but without the plus sign, and here is the way that it could have been expanded. The curly braces group the ending arguments into one. The result would be the same as in the previous example. Which way you do it is up to you. Also, you can specify default arguments for parameters. Here is an example of how that's done. The default arguments apply to the last parameters. For this macro, the first argument is taken from the line on which the macro is expanded. If no second argument is supplied, it's taken to be EAX. If no third argument is supplied, it's taken to be maximum in brackets. You define a minimum and a maximum number of parameters for a macro of this type. The minimum number of arguments are then required in the macro expansion, and you provide defaults for the optional ones. If you leave a default argument off the line, then the default becomes a blank. You can even specify the maximum number of arguments as an asterisk, and I'll cover that in the next lesson. Now you know the parameter numbers are %1, %2, and so on. Well, there is a special one, %0. It is the number of arguments supplied on the line. The number of parameters defined for a macro are important in more than one way. If you have a macro defined this way, with two parameters, you can use unmacro to delete it, but only if you specify the same number of parameters. The match must be exact. For example, if you have a macro defined this way, to undefine it, you must use exactly the same number of parameters.